In 1931, a sharecropper in the Mississippi Delta rose before light with nothing guaranteed and everything required. The cotton would not plant itself. The children would not feed themselves. The landlord would not wait. He had no savings, no safety net, no government program with his name on it. What he had was a set of habits so ingrained they no longer felt like choices. They felt like the shape of a man. By the time his children were grown, they had inherited those habits without ever being taught them directly. Character in that world was not discussed. It was demonstrated every single day, until it became the only thing a man owned that no depression could take from him. Number 15. Accepting help without losing dignity. When the crop failed and the family needed assistance, your grandfather accepted it. He did not perform gratitude he did not feel, and he did not refuse help out of pride that his family could not afford. He accepted what was offered, used it for exactly what it was needed for, and found a way to return the favor when the season turned. The Depression created a culture of mutual aid in working communities. Not charity in the modern sense, but a rotating economy of necessity in which everyone gave and everyone received, and neither giving nor receiving carried shame. A 1933 community welfare study of rural Mississippi found that households that participated openly in mutual aid networks recovered from crop failure and unemployment at significantly higher rates than those that refused assistance out of pride. Research on help-seeking behavior from the University of Pennsylvania has established that the willingness to accept help without allowing it to define the self is among the strongest predictors of resilience and recovery under hardship. Your grandfather took the help, and he remembered who gave it. Number 14. Teaching what he knew to whoever would learn. If your grandfather knew how to do something, he passed it on, not in formal instruction, in the doing. The boy watched while the man worked, then worked beside the man, then worked alone while the man watched. Knowledge was not hoarded as competitive advantage. It was distributed as community insurance, but the more people who knew how to do a thing, the more likely the thing would get done when the man who first knew it could not do it anymore. A 1935 vocational education survey found that 83% of Depression-era tradesmen reported having learned their primary skill through direct informal transmission from a family member or community elder rather than formal training. Research on knowledge transfer from MIT's Sloan School of Management has found that tacit knowledge, the kind that lives in hands and judgment rather than manuals, transfers most effectively through exactly the method your grandfather used. Side-by-side practice with an experienced practitioner over extended time. Your grandfather taught because that was how the knowledge survived. He understood that what died with him was lost to everyone. Number 13. Bearing witness to other people's hardship without trying to fix it. When a neighbor lost a child, your grandfather did not arrive with solutions. He arrived with presence. He sat. He said little. He stayed long enough for the person in grief to know they were not alone in it. The Depression produced a generation of men who had seen enough collective suffering to understand that some pain is not a problem to be solved, but a weight to be shared, and that the sharing itself was the only help available. A 1934 community support study of Appalachian families found that the most consistently cited form of support during bereavement and crisis was simple physical presence, being there, ranked above practical assistance, financial help, and advice. Research on social support and grief from the University of California, San Francisco has found that non-instrumental presence, being with someone without agenda or solution, activates the social safety system in ways that advice and problem-solving do not, measurably reducing the physiological stress response during acute grief. Your grandfather sat with people in their pain. He knew that was the whole job. Number 12. Keeping the body honest with cold water and hard work. Not as discipline in the aspirational sense, as maintenance in the practical sense. The body was the instrument of survival, and a man who let it soften was a man whose options were narrowing. Cold water in the morning, physical work through the day, no indulgence that could not be afforded. Not as philosophy, but as arithmetic. A 1932 occupational health study of southern agricultural workers found that men who maintained consistent physical activity through unemployment, continuing to chop wood, maintain the property, work the garden, reported significantly better mental health outcomes and faster return to employment than those who became sedentary during jobless periods. Research on exercise and depression from Duke University, comparing aerobic exercise to antidepressant medication, found that moderate physical activity was equally effective at reducing depressive symptoms and significantly more effective at preventing relapse. Your grandfather kept moving not because he had read the research, because a man who stopped moving stopped being useful, and a man who stopped being useful stopped being a man he recognized. Number 11. Measuring words before speaking them. Your grandfather did not say everything he thought. He considered. He waited. He let other men finish. And when he spoke, it was because he had something to add that had not already been said. In communities where reputation was currency and words traveled fast, a man who spoke carelessly was a man whose words eventually stopped being trusted. A 1937 community leadership study across rural Alabama found that men identified as most trusted and sought after for advice spoke significantly less per conversation than average, but their contributions were rated significantly higher in relevance and accuracy. Research on verbal behavior and perceived competence from Harvard University, published in 2014, found that measured, selective speech is rated as more intelligent, more trustworthy, and more authoritative by observers than frequent, voluble speech, regardless of the actual content. Your grandfather thought before he spoke. Every word he said had passed a filter that most modern communication bypasses entirely. Number 10. Keeping the home in order regardless of what was happening outside it. Whatever the crisis, drought, debt, unemployment, illness, the house was kept. The floor was swept. The table was cleared. The beds were made. Order inside the home was the one domain over which your grandmother had complete authority, regardless of what the economy was doing outside the front door. It was not aesthetics. It was resistance. The daily assertion that the chaos outside had not been permitted to enter. A 1933 household psychology study found that families who maintained domestic order during periods of economic crisis reported significantly lower rates of depression and marital conflict than those whose homes fell into disorder during the same periods. Research on environmental order and psychological well-being from Princeton University's Neuroscience Institute found that physical disorder in the living environment produces measurable increases in cortisol and cognitive load, the brain perceiving unresolved environmental chaos as unresolved threat. Your grandmother swept the floor every day that the depression tried to take everything. The swept floor was her answer. Here is where these habits stop being about survival and start being about something the depression built that hardship alone cannot explain. Number 9. Forgiving debts that would never be repaid. There came a point where your grandfather knew the money was not coming back. The neighbor who had borrowed $2 in 1931 and lost everything by 1933. The cousin whose debt had outlasted his ability to honor it. At some point, your grandfather made a private accounting and wrote it off. Not announced, not discussed, simply released. The alternative was carrying the weight of the uncollectible as grievance. And grievance was a luxury that men with actual problems could not afford. A 1934 community behavior study of Depression-era rural communities found that men who released unrecoverable social debts reported significantly higher community standing and lower chronic stress than those who maintained grievances over uncollectible obligations. Research on forgiveness from Dr. Fred Luskin of Stanford University's Forgiveness Project has found that the act of releasing unresolvable debt or grievance produces measurable reductions in blood pressure, cortisol, and rumination, independent of whether the forgiveness is communicated to the other party. Your grandfather forgave what could not be repaid, not for the other man's sake, for his own. Number 8. Dressing with intention even when there was nowhere important to go. Clean clothes on Sunday. A pressed shirt for the meeting even when the meeting was in a neighbor's kitchen. Your grandfather dressed with care not because appearances were more important than substance, but because the care taken with appearance was a signal to himself, a daily declaration that he had not given up, that the standards he held when times were good had not been abandoned because times were hard. A 1935 Community Observer study of Depression-era households found that families that maintained dress standards during periods of unemployment were rated significantly higher on community trust and social cohesion by neighbors and community leaders. Research on enclothed cognition from Northwestern University found that the symbolic meaning a person attributes to their clothing measurably affects their psychological state and performance. Wearing clothing associated with care and intention produces higher self-regard and better cognitive performance than wearing clothing associated with slovenliness or defeat. Your grandfather put on a clean shirt when there was nowhere to go. He was dressing for himself. That was the point. Number 7. Laughing at hardship without dismissing it. There was humor in your grandfather's house even in the worst years. Dark humor. Dry humor. The kind that acknowledged how bad things were without being destroyed by it. A man who could find something absurd in his own situation had located a distance between himself and his circumstances that despair could not cross. This was not denial. The hardship was fully acknowledged. It was perspective, earned by men who had decided that suffering did not require their complete surrender. A 1932 community mental health observation of Depression-era families in rural Georgia documented that households with active humor cultures showed significantly lower rates of psychological breakdown, family dissolution, and suicide than those without. Research on humor and resilience from the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor has found that the ability to find humor in adversity without minimizing it is among the strongest predictors of psychological resilience under sustained stress. Your grandfather laughed at the hard years, not because they were funny, because laughing was something the depression couldn't take. Number 6. Keeping a private standard higher than the public one. What your grandfather did when no one was watching was better than what he did when they were. Not performed virtue. Actual standard. The work done in private was the same quality as the work inspected. The promise made alone was kept with the same reliability as the promise made publicly. In Depression era, working communities where everything was visible and nothing was anonymous, a man whose private behavior diverged from his public behavior was eventually found out. And finding out was catastrophic in communities where trust was the primary currency. A 1936 character study of Appalachian community leaders found that the quality most consistently cited by communities when identifying men of genuine authority was behavioral consistency across observed and unobserved conditions. Research on integrity from Wharton's Organizational Psychology Department has established that consistency between public and private behavior is the foundational mechanism of trust, and that communities can detect its absence with remarkable accuracy over time. Your grandfather's private standard was his real standard. Everything else was just evidence. Number 5. Praying or reflecting before making any significant decision. Before the significant decision, the move, the purchase, the commitment, your grandfather stopped. He did not act on the first feeling. He did not decide in the heat of necessity. He waited, he reflected, he consulted whatever internal authority he recognized as wiser than his immediate impulse. For most men of his generation and faith, this was prayer. For some, it was simply the habit of sleeping on it, refusing to commit until the morning had confirmed what the evening had proposed. A 1935 decision-making behavior study of Depression-era farm operators found that men who reported a deliberate pre-decision pause, prayer, reflection, or overnight delay made significantly fewer decisions they later described as regretted than those who acted on immediate judgment. Research on decision quality and temporal distance from Columbia University found that introducing time between impulse and decision measurably improves decision quality by reducing the influence of immediate emotional state and increasing the weight given to long-term consequence. Your grandfather slept on it. The morning usually knew. Number 4. Working harder when others were watching, not to impress them, but to set the standard. When others were present, your grandfather worked at his best, not to be seen working at his best, but because the standard he set when others could observe it became the standard others held themselves to. In a community where labor was collective and survival was mutual, the pace and quality of one man's visible effort directly influenced the pace and quality of those around him. A 1934 agricultural productivity study of cooperative farm labor in Mississippi found that teams with one high-effort visible worker consistently outproduced teams without one. The mechanism being what researchers called social facilitation through behavioral modeling. Research on effort contagion from Cornell University has established that witnessing another person's sustained high effort produces automatic increases in personal effort output in observers, a neurological mirroring effect that operates below conscious awareness. Your grandfather worked hard in front of people not to show off. He was setting a pace that everyone around him would unconsciously follow. Number 3. Putting the family's needs ahead of his own comfort, without martyrdom. Your grandfather went without so his children did not have to. He ate less so there was enough for everyone. He wore the coat another season so the money could go somewhere more urgent. And he did this without commentary, without performance of sacrifice, without the silent accounting that transforms generosity into debt. A 1933 family economic study of Depression-era households found that families in which adults consistently prioritized children's material needs over adult comfort showed significantly better child development outcomes and lower rates of family dissolution than those where adult needs competed with children's. Research on parental sacrifice and family cohesion from the University of Virginia found that consistent, uncommented sacrifice, giving without keeping score, produces stronger family bonds and higher child resilience than equivalent sacrifice accompanied by expressed resentment or expectation of recognition. Your grandfather gave without keeping score. His children knew it without being told. They spent the rest of their lives trying to deserve it. Number 2. Maintaining hope as a daily practice, not a feeling. Hope in 1931 was not an emotion. It was a decision made every morning regardless of what the evidence suggested. The crop might fail again. The job might not come back. The money might not stretch. Your grandfather got up anyway. He planted anyway. He showed up anyway. Not because he was certain it would work out, because the alternative to hoping was a direction he had decided not to go. A 1932 psychological study of Depression-era family resilience found that the single most consistent characteristic of families that remained intact and functional through the worst years was what researchers described as active future orientation. The daily behavioral maintenance of plans, preparations, and routines oriented toward a future that had not yet proved itself. Research on hope theory from Dr. Charles Snyder of the University of Kansas established that hope, defined not as optimism but as the perceived capacity to find pathways toward goals and the motivation to use them, is among the strongest predictors of resilience, achievement, and psychological well-being under adversity. Your grandfather hoped not because things looked good, because he had decided that was what he was going to do every single morning. Number 1. Living as if his children were watching, because they were. Everything your grandfather did, he did in front of his children. The way he treated a man he disagreed with, the way he handled a loss, The way he spoke about people who were not in the room. The way he got up on the mornings when getting up was the hardest thing available to him. His children were watching all of it, recording all of it, building from all of it the template of what a person was supposed to be. He knew this. He conducted himself accordingly. A 1936 developmental psychology study following Depression-era children into adulthood found that the single strongest predictor of adult character, measured by community trust, relationship stability, and personal integrity, was the behavioral modeling of the primary adult in the household, observed during the ages of 6 to 14. Research on observational learning from Dr. Albert Bandura of Stanford University established that children acquire more character from watching what adults do under pressure than from everything adults explicitly teach. Your grandfather's greatest act of parenting was not what he said to his children. It was what he did when the depression was trying to break him, and they were watching to see if it would. 15 habits. No self-help book required. No podcast. No morning routine influencer. Just a man who decided every single day that who he was mattered more than what he had. His children inherited that decision without knowing it was being made. The question is whether you are making the same decision, and whether the people watching you are learning what you intend to teach.